April 15, 1933, Smyrna, Turkey. Virginia Hall climbed over a wire fence during a bird-hunting excursion with friends from the American consulate. Her shotgun discharged. The blast tore through her left foot. Within hours, gangrene set in. Within days, surgeons amputated her leg below the knee. Within weeks, the 27-year-old woman learned her diplomatic career was finished before it truly began. The U.S. State Department maintained an obscure rule barring amputees from diplomacy. Secretary of State Cordell Hull suggested she could become a fine career girl in the consular service. Filing papers, answering phones, remaining invisible. Virginia Hall had other plans. 10 years later, she would become the spy the Gestapo feared more than any other Allied agent in France. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, would reportedly say, "I would give anything to get my hands on that limping Canadian bitch." She wasn't Canadian, but she did limp, and by the time the Gestapo realized who she was, she had already escaped over the Pyrenees Mountains in winter with a 7-pound wooden prosthetic leg strapped to her body. The prosthetic had a name, Cuthbert, and Cuthbert would accompany Virginia Hall through operations that destroyed bridges, derailed trains, coordinated escape lines for downed pilots, organized resistance networks across France, and sent intelligence that helped win World War II. The woman with one leg outsmarted the Gestapo for nearly 4 years. This is how she did it. 1906, Baltimore, Maryland. Virginia Hall was born into a wealthy, worldly family that imposed no limits on their daughter's potential. Athletic and sharp, she excelled at everything. Her high school yearbook named her the most original in our class. She began college studies at Barnard and Radcliffe. She finished them in Paris and Vienna. By graduation, she spoke fluent French, German, and Italian, with conversational Russian. Her ambition: join the U.S. Foreign Service and see the world while serving her country. The Foreign Service rejected her application. No women, not going to happen. This was the 1920s. American women had only gained voting rights in 1920. The idea of female diplomats negotiating international affairs remained unthinkable to most government officials. But Virginia Hall refused to accept rejection. If she couldn't enter Foreign Service through the front door, she'd use the back entrance. She secured a clerk position at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, Poland, then a position at the U.S. Consulate in Smyrna, Turkey, then Venice, then Tallinn, Estonia. She worked in military attaché departments, finance departments, any position that kept her overseas and involved in diplomatic work. She learned languages, studied local politics, built networks of contacts. She positioned herself to eventually break through the diplomatic glass ceiling. Then came the hunting accident, the gunshot, the gangrene, the amputation, the prosthetic. Virginia named her wooden leg Cuthbert, possibly after the Anglo-Saxon monk and saint, though the reason was lost to history. The prosthetic weighed more than 7 pounds. It consisted of wood and leather with an aluminum foot. It attached to her body with leather belts wrapped around her waist. Even when properly fitted, it caused pressure sores and chafing. Walking required constant adjustment to prevent the leg from slipping. And it ended her diplomatic ambitions. The State Department's rejection letter was polite but absolute. No amputees in the Foreign Service. Virginia Hall took a leave from her clerk position, returned to Maryland, and spent months learning to walk with Cuthbert. The physical rehabilitation was painful, the emotional adjustment was harder. She'd lost her left leg and her career in one accident, but she hadn't lost her determination. 1939, Europe descended into war. Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war on Germany. Virginia Hall resigned from the State Department and volunteered as an ambulance driver for the French 9th Artillery Regiment. If America wouldn't let her serve as a diplomat, she'd serve France as a medical volunteer. She drove ambulances through combat zones. She evacuated wounded soldiers. She experienced war firsthand. Then, in May 1940, Germany launched its Western offensive. The Maginot Line collapsed. France fell in 6 weeks. The French government surrendered. Virginia fled to England. She arrived in London just as the Luftwaffe began bombing the city during the Battle of Britain. She found work as a clerk in the US Defense Attaché office. Safe work, boring work, dead-end work. But London in 1940 wasn't just burning under German bombs. It was also becoming the center of something unprecedented, a secret organization dedicated to ungentlemanly warfare behind enemy lines. February 1941, Virginia Hall met Nicholas Boddington. He worked for F Section of the Special Operations Executive, SOE. SOE had been created in July 1940 after Dunkirk's evacuation proved Britain couldn't defeat Germany through conventional military means alone. Prime Minister Winston Churchill gave SOE its mission: set Europe ablaze. SOE would conduct sabotage, espionage, and propaganda behind enemy lines. They would support resistance movements. They would coordinate intelligence gathering. They would create chaos in occupied territories. The problem: SOE desperately needed agents willing to parachute or infiltrate into Nazi-occupied France. And they needed women. Women could move through occupied territories more freely than men. German soldiers expected military-age men to be working or conscripted. They scrutinized young men constantly. But women could be shoppers, farm workers, secretaries, nurses. Women aroused less suspicion. SOE began recruiting female agents in 1942, though Virginia Hall would deploy before official recruitment began. Boddington recognized immediately that Hall possessed ideal qualifications: fluent French, first-hand knowledge of French countryside, experience living abroad, diplomatic training, intelligence about Vichy France from her recent work there, and crucially, unflappable courage demonstrated by her continued service despite losing a leg. He recommended her immediately to Maurice Buckmaster, head of F Section. Buckmaster offered Hall a field position subject to security checks. This was extraordinary. SOE had never sent a female agent into occupied France. They'd barely sent any agents at all. The organization was still figuring out basic procedures. And they were proposing to send a one-legged American woman into Nazi territory. Virginia Hall accepted immediately. Her SOE training covered weapons, communications, security, and resistance activities. She learned encoding and decoding, how to detect surveillance, how to pick locks, how to handle explosives, hand-to-hand combat. The SOE subjected her to realistic simulations of Gestapo interrogation, including water torture. They needed to know if she would break under pressure. She didn't. But the prosthetic posed challenges. Virginia couldn't parachute. The landing impact would shatter Cuthbert or break her remaining leg. She would enter France by boat or across borders with forged papers. August 1941, Virginia Hall arrived in Vichy France, the southern zone controlled by the collaborationist French government under Marshal Pétain. Her cover story: American journalist for the New York Post. Her mission codename: Geologist 5. Her objectives: gather intelligence on Vichy political developments, economic conditions, and resistance movements, establish networks, coordinate activities. She carried forged papers identifying her as Virginia Hall, American correspondent. The cover provided excellent excuse for traveling, asking questions, and meeting diverse contacts. She settled in Lyon, France's third-largest city, strategic hub, and resistance center. For the next 15 months, Virginia Hall built something remarkable: She created the Heckler Network. She organized resistance cells. She recruited French citizens willing to spy for Britain. She established safe houses. She coordinated escape lines for downed RAF pilots. She arranged money, weapons, and supply drops from Britain. She trained resistance fighters in sabotage techniques. She developed 4 distinct identities: Virginia, Brigitte, Marie, Germaine, different personas for police, various resistance groups, and different social contexts. She changed her appearance constantly: hairstyles, clothing, walking gait, mannerisms. One of her agents, Suzanne Bertillon, established a network of 90 spies across southern France, providing intelligence on ammunition depots, fuel storage, and a German submarine base being constructed. Virginia's operational security was meticulous. She used dead drops, hiding messages behind loose bricks in specific walls. She employed signal systems. A potted geranium in her window indicated a pickup was ready. She met contacts in cafes where bartenders would pass messages stuck to the bottom of glasses. She moved between safe houses constantly. She never stayed anywhere long enough to establish patterns. The intelligence flowed back to London through coded radio transmissions. German troop movements, military installation locations, supply route information, Gestapo activities, resistance capabilities and needs. But success created danger. The more effective Virginia became, the more attention she attracted. The Vichy police noticed the American reporter seemed unusually interested in sensitive information. The Gestapo began hearing reports about a mysterious woman organizing resistance activities. They didn't know her name. They didn't know what she looked like. But they knew someone was coordinating operations with unusual effectiveness. Then came the penetration. Abbé Alèche, codename Bishop, worked as a priest in Paris. He claimed to support the resistance. He offered to carry messages between Paris and southern France. Resistance members trusted him. He was a Gestapo informant. Through Bishop, German intelligence learned about networks in Lyon. They learned about safe houses. They learned about escape lines. They learned about an American woman at the center of multiple operations. December 1942. Germany moved to occupy all of France, eliminating the Vichy zone. The situation changed overnight. Gestapo and SS forces flooded southern France. They brought wanted lists. Virginia Hall's name was on them. SOE headquarters sent urgent instructions: evacuate immediately. Virginia initially resisted. Her networks needed her. Operations were ongoing. Pilots awaited evacuation. Resistance fighters depended on supply drops she coordinated. But SOE insisted. If captured, she would be tortured and executed. Her intelligence value to the Gestapo would be immense. She knew networks across southern France, British operations procedures, codes, safe houses, contacts. Virginia accepted reality. She burned her documents. She warned her networks. She destroyed evidence. Then she fled south toward the Pyrenees, November 1942. The Pyrenees Mountains separate France from Spain. Peaks reach 7,500 feet. Winter weather brings heavy snow and bitter cold. The crossing routes follow steep, dangerous paths. Many attempting the journey die from exposure, falls, or German patrols. Virginia Hall planned to cross with 2 resistance fighters. They hired smugglers as guides. The smugglers initially refused to take a woman, especially an amputee, on such a treacherous journey. Virginia insisted. She had no choice. The journey took 3 days. Heavy snow covered the paths. Temperature dropped below freezing. Wind howled through mountain passes. Cuthbert became agony. The prosthetic's leather straps chafed bleeding wounds into her waist. The prosthetic sock protecting her remaining leg became soaked with blood. The wooden leg slipped constantly on snow and ice. Several times, Virginia nearly fell off cliff edges. At a safe house in the mountains, she transmitted a message to London. Crossing mountains. Hope Cuthbert will not be troublesome. SOE headquarters didn't understand. They thought Cuthbert was a male agent or informant. Their response: if Cuthbert is giving you difficulty, have him eliminated. Virginia would have laughed if she weren't in such pain. Eliminating Cuthbert meant cutting off her leg entirely. She continued the climb. When the prosthetic slipped and she stared down at certain death below, she refused to quit. When the pain became unbearable, she kept walking. When her guide suggested turning back, she pushed forward. 3 days later, she reached the Spanish side. Frostbitten, exhausted, bleeding, but alive. She boarded a train in a small Spanish mountain town. Within hours, Spanish police arrested her. Illegal border crossing, forged documents, suspicious circumstances. She spent 6 weeks in a Spanish prison, facing possible extradition to France. The Gestapo wanted her. The Spanish government was technically neutral but sympathetic to fascism. If Spain returned her to German-controlled France, she would be executed. Finally, someone she'd contacted managed to alert the American consulate in Barcelona. American officials negotiated her release. January 1943. Virginia Hall arrived back in London. King George VI personally awarded her the Member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE. The honour was typically public ceremony with press coverage. Virginia insisted on private ceremony with no publicity. Any publicity would compromise her ability to return to field operations. And she absolutely intended to return to France. But SOE refused. Maurice Buckmaster personally told her, too dangerous. The Gestapo had her description. They had wanted posters. They knew about the limp. Klaus Barbie, Gestapo chief in Lyon, who would later become known as the Butcher of Lyon for his torture methods, personally wanted her captured. Gestapo transmissions referred to her as the most dangerous of all Allied spies. They'd nicknamed her Artemis after the Greek hunting goddess. German intelligence considered eliminating her a top priority. If Virginia returned to France, she'd be recognized and captured within days. Virginia Hall had other plans. April 1944. The United States had formed its own intelligence agency, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, precursor to the CIA. OSS needed experienced agents for operations supporting the upcoming D-Day invasion. Virginia transferred to OSS. They gave her new training: wireless radio operation, advanced tradecraft, updated codes. They gave her a new mission: infiltrate France, rebuild resistance networks in northern regions, coordinate sabotage operations to disrupt German response to Allied landings. And they gave her new cover identity with complete disguise. She wouldn't return as Virginia Hall, sophisticated American journalist. She'd return as Marcelle Montagne, elderly French peasant woman. The transformation was dramatic. She dyed her hair grey and pulled it back in a severe bun. She filed down her teeth to resemble French peasant dental work. She affected a pronounced limp, different from her natural gait, to mislead anyone looking for the limping lady. She wore rough peasant clothes, carried herself like an old woman, and adopted the suspicious, weathered demeanor of someone who'd suffered through years of occupation. The disguise was so effective that fellow OSS agents who'd worked with her before barely recognized her. March 1944. Virginia Hall landed in Brittany from a British motor torpedo boat. Her prosthetic prevented parachute insertion. She came ashore in darkness and immediately disappeared into the French countryside. Her cover story: elderly widow working as a farmhand and radio operator. The cover was brilliant. Old women were invisible to occupying forces. German soldiers barely noticed them. And a woman herding cows or working in fields could travel across countryside scouting drop zones without arousing suspicion. Virginia moved to the Haute-Loire region of central France. She began rebuilding networks the Gestapo had destroyed. She contacted surviving resistance members. She recruited new agents. She established safe houses. She identified drop zones for supply parachutes, and she transmitted radio messages to London. Radio work was among the most dangerous activities in occupied France. German direction-finding equipment could locate transmitters within minutes. Radio operators rarely survived more than 6 weeks. Virginia transmitted anyway. She'd move to a new location, set up her radio, transmit in short bursts to minimize detection time, then pack up and move again. She never transmitted from the same location twice. She carried the radio equipment on her back between locations. The equipment weighed over 30 pounds. Combined with Cuthbert, her total load exceeded 40 pounds. She walked, and walked, and walked. Between March and September 1944, Virginia Hall coordinated operations that destroyed 4 bridges cutting German supply lines, derailed dozens of freight trains, blew up ammunition depots, organized and armed 1,500 French resistance fighters, directed guerrilla attacks, killing 150 German soldiers and capturing 300 more, mapped drop zones for Allied supply parachutes, coordinated intelligence on German positions forwarded to Allied command, trained 3 resistance battalions in guerrilla warfare tactics. When D-Day occurred on June 6, 1944, Virginia Hall's networks were ready. Her resistance fighters cut German communication lines. They sabotaged roads delaying reinforcements moving toward Normandy. They ambushed supply convoys. They provided intelligence on German troop movements. The Haute-Loire department was liberated by resistance forces before American armies arrived. Virginia Hall had cleared the territory of German forces through coordinated guerrilla operations. September 1944. As Allied armies pushed across France, SOE and OSS field operations wound down. Virginia Hall was finally stood down after more than 3 years of continuous operations behind enemy lines. She'd survived, against odds that killed 40% of female SOE agents, against Gestapo surveillance that captured dozens of her fellow agents, against the daily danger of betrayal, torture and execution, and she'd done it with a wooden leg. Post-war, Virginia Hall received the Distinguished Service Cross from the United States, the only female civilian to receive the award during World War II, the Member of the Order of the British Empire from Britain, the Croix de Guerre from France. She became one of the most decorated women of the war. General William Wild Bill Donovan, head of OSS, personally awarded her the Distinguished Service Cross. He wanted a public ceremony with press coverage. Virginia declined. She insisted on a private ceremony in Donovan's office with no publicity. Her reasoning: publicity would make future intelligence work difficult. She'd already decided to continue in intelligence. 1945–1966, Virginia Hall joined the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency. She was one of the first female officers. She was one of the few with extensive field experience. She should have been a senior officer running operations. Instead, the CIA didn't know what to do with her. Male colleagues felt threatened by her experience. A secret internal CIA report later noted that she had been sidelined, shunted into backwater accounts because she had so much experience that she overshadowed her male colleagues. She'd defeated the Gestapo, but she couldn't defeat bureaucracy and patriarchy. Virginia Hall spent her CIA career largely as an analyst. She worked on desk assignments. She never received field postings appropriate to her skills. She was undervalued, underutilized, underappreciated. In 1966, at age 60, mandatory retirement ended her intelligence career. She'd served for 25 years in intelligence, longer than almost anyone. She'd spent more time behind enemy lines than virtually any Allied agent. She'd organized networks that helped liberate France. She'd outsmarted the Gestapo for 4 years. And she retired from a desk job. 1982. Virginia Hall died at age 76. She'd married Paul Guyot, a French OSS operative she'd worked with during the war. They'd lived quietly in Maryland. She rarely spoke about her wartime experiences. Her husband said she'd followed OSS Director Donovan's instruction from the 1950s. "Okay, you can talk now." But she never did. That was how Virginia lived. Her story remained largely unknown until the 1980s, when historians began uncovering SOE and OSS records. Biographies appeared. Recognition slowly emerged. In 2016, the CIA named a building after her at headquarters. The Virginia Hall Expeditionary Center honors her legacy. But the question lingers: how is it possible that one of history's greatest spies remained unknown for decades? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about how history remembers women's contributions. Virginia Hall's male contemporaries became famous. British agents like Eddie Chapman and Dushko Popov inspired spy novels and films. American OSS officers wrote memoirs and received public acclaim. But female agents, they faded into obscurity, partly because they'd been trained to be invisible and succeeded too well, partly because post-war society wanted women back in domestic roles, not celebrated as combat veterans, partly because intelligence agencies classified their operations for decades, partly because male-dominated historical narratives simply overlooked them. Virginia Hall's case is particularly egregious. She operated longer than almost any Allied agent. She achieved more concrete results than most male agents ever did. The Gestapo considered her their most dangerous enemy. Yet her story wasn't widely known until the 21st century. What made Virginia Hall extraordinary wasn't just her courage, though she possessed that in abundance. It wasn't just her intelligence, though she was brilliant. It wasn't just her operational skill, though she was exceptional. What made her extraordinary was her refusal to let anything stop her. Not gender discrimination that barred her from diplomacy, not a hunting accident that cost her leg, not bureaucratic rules that said amputees couldn't serve, not State Department rejection, not the Gestapo hunting her, not a 7-pound wooden leg, not mountains or snow or pain, not her own government's post-war indifference. She simply refused to quit. Every obstacle became a challenge to overcome. Every rejection became motivation to find another path. Every limitation became an opportunity to prove limitations were illusions. When the State Department said women couldn't be diplomats, she became a clerk and worked her way up. When the amputation ended her diplomatic hopes, she became a spy. When SOE said she was too compromised to return to France, she joined OSS and went back anyway. When the CIA sidelined her, she continued working until mandatory retirement. Virginia Hall's life demonstrates a principle that transcends espionage: the power of persistent determination against institutional resistance. The systems told her no at every turn. The rules said she couldn't serve. The limitations said she'd never succeed. The danger said she'd be captured. The odds said she'd be killed. She succeeded anyway. Not because the systems changed. They didn't, as her post-war CIA treatment proved. Not because the limitations disappeared. Cuthbert remained painful and awkward throughout her life. Not because the danger diminished. She faced death constantly during her operations. She succeeded because she refused to accept that other people's limitations applied to her. The Gestapo called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. They were right. But not just because of her operational success. She was dangerous because she represented something the Nazis couldn't comprehend. A woman who refused to be constrained by what society said women could or couldn't do. She was dangerous because she proved that physical disability doesn't determine capability. She was dangerous because she outsmarted, outworked, and outlasted German intelligence services that had unlimited resources, brutal methods, and absolute authority. She was dangerous because she couldn't be stopped. Klaus Barbie wanted desperately to capture that limping Canadian bitch. He never did. She escaped right past him, crossed mountains he thought impassable, returned to France when he thought she'd fled for good, operated in territories he thought secure, coordinated networks he thought destroyed. And when the war ended, she lived to see him prosecuted for war crimes. Virginia Hall survived the war not through luck, though luck helped, but through superior tradecraft, meticulous planning, constant vigilance, and absolute commitment. She changed identities constantly. She moved between safe houses incessantly. She varied her patterns continuously. She trusted no one completely. She prepared escape routes always. She maintained operational security obsessively. This wasn't paranoia, this was survival. Fellow female SOE agents who became comfortable, who developed patterns, who trusted too readily. They were captured, tortured, and executed. Violette Szabo, captured, sent to Ravensbrück, executed at age 23. Noor Inayat Khan, betrayed, captured, tortured, sent to Dachau, executed on arrival. Dozens of others, arrested, interrogated, killed. Virginia Hall survived because she never relaxed. She never assumed she was safe. She never believed her cover was perfect. She maintained constant awareness that one mistake meant death. And she did this while carrying 40 pounds of radio equipment across French countryside, while walking on a wooden leg that caused bleeding wounds, while changing identities multiple times daily, while coordinating resistance operations involving hundreds of people, while being actively hunted by the Gestapo. The mental and physical stamina required is almost incomprehensible, but perhaps most remarkable, she made it look easy. German intelligence knew someone was organizing resistance activities. They never quite figured out it was the elderly peasant woman herding cows. The sophisticated American journalist had transformed so completely that even people looking for Virginia Hall couldn't recognize Marcel Montaigne. That transformation required more than theatrical makeup and costume. It required inhabiting the role completely, moving differently, thinking differently, reacting differently, becoming a different person entirely, method acting at the highest stakes, where a single broken character moment meant torture and death. Virginia Hall maintained her covers for months at a time without breaking character even once. This is why she was the most dangerous Allied spy. Not because she killed the most Germans, she killed relatively few. Not because she blew up the most targets, others conducted more sabotage missions. Not because she gathered the most intelligence, other agents sent more reports. She was the most dangerous because she coordinated everything. She built networks, she connected resistance groups, she facilitated operations, she multiplied effectiveness of dozens of other agents. One Virginia Hall made 100 resistance fighters more effective. Those fighters disrupted German operations. Those disruptions delayed reinforcements. Those delays helped Allied armies advance. The ripple effects of her work touched thousands of operations and saved countless lives. And she did it with a wooden leg named Cuthbert. The prosthetic that should have disqualified her from service became part of her legend. The limitation that should have prevented her success became her calling card. The disability that should have made espionage impossible became perversely part of what made her so effective. Because nobody expected a one-legged woman to be a dangerous spy. German soldiers didn't scrutinize limping women the way they scrutinized military-age men. Gestapo agents didn't suspect elderly peasant women could be organizing resistance networks. The disability made her invisible in ways able-bodied agents never achieved. Virginia Hall turned her greatest limitation into her greatest operational advantage. That takes not just courage or skill, that takes wisdom. That takes seeing reality clearly and leveraging every asset, including apparent weaknesses. Winston Churchill called SOE the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Virginia Hall embodied that spirit better than almost anyone. She didn't fight by rules. She didn't respect limitations. She didn't accept defeat. She operated in moral gray zones where necessary. She did whatever the mission required. Because the alternative was Nazi victory. And that was unacceptable. Her career asked a question still relevant today. What makes someone qualified for difficult, dangerous work? Physical perfection. Virginia proved otherwise. Gender. She demonstrated women could perform as well or better than men in intelligence operations. Following rules. She showed that breaking rules is sometimes necessary to achieve the mission. Official approval. She succeeded despite her own government initially rejecting her service. Virginia Hall's career suggests qualification comes from determination, intelligence, adaptability, and courage, not from checking arbitrary boxes on qualification forms. The State Department rejected her because of her prosthetic. SOE trained her despite regulations against deploying female agents. OSS sent her back to France when SOE said she was too compromised. CIA sidelined her despite her proven capabilities. Every institution failed to fully appreciate her abilities. Yet she succeeded anyway, because she didn't need their approval. She needed their mission, and she knew she could accomplish it better than most people with proper qualifications. This is perhaps her greatest legacy, proving that determination and capability matter more than credentials and conformity. Virginia Hall wasn't supposed to be a great spy. She was supposed to be a fine career girl filing papers in a consular office. She was supposed to accept her limitations and retire to comfortable civilian life. She was supposed to let her disability define her capabilities. Instead, she defined herself. She decided what she could do. She proved what was possible. She changed history. And she did it all with a wooden leg that weighed 7 pounds and caused bleeding wounds and made mountain climbing nearly impossible. She did it with Cuthbert. The Gestapo never caught her. The mountains couldn't stop her. The bureaucracy couldn't break her. The patriarchy couldn't silence her story forever. Because the truth eventually emerges. The truth about what one determined woman accomplished despite every obstacle. The truth about how she outsmarted Nazi Germany's most feared intelligence service. The truth about why the Gestapo called her their most dangerous enemy. Virginia Hall was the woman who outsmarted the Gestapo. She did it with intelligence, courage, determination, and Cuthbert. And she deserves to be remembered as one of history's greatest spies. Greatest spies. Greatest spies. Greatest spies. Greatest spies.